Okay, so good evening to everyone, to the Climate Change Committee. Welcome to those online. I hope everyone can hear us wherever you're sitting. So a very good evening to you. So we'll go through the usual stuff at the beginning. And Hannah, apologies. I know there's a couple, isn't there?
I haven't received any directly, but if you have...
I've got a couple. So Ray, I mean, you're on, aren't you, Ray? You're going to be late. I think you're. Did I see you on there?
Yes, I'm on, but I have to leave at 7.
Aha. Okay. Thank you, Ray. And I think Sandra will be a little bit late. So there we go. I think that's all. I haven't seen Mary, but she's usually here.
She was at the last meeting we were in.
Maybe she'll join us. Okay. All right, so moving on, the declaration, I won't go through it because everyone knows it. I'll just wait to see if anyone's got anything to declare. And I presume they haven't, so that's fine. And now the minutes, and I wondered if anyone has anything to ask about the minutes. I've got a couple of things. Kevin, can you hear me okay, Kevin?
Yes, Chair.
Oh, great. Thank you. Just a couple of bits on here. It was on page 4, and it was all about the warmth and grants and things. And I suspect you'll update us in your piece, will you?
Chair, not specifically looking at the grants. I think you'll remember that we've had a couple of sessions where some detailed questions have been asked. I do have Gareth Jones online, so if there was particular things that you wanted to pick up around the grants, I think we're going to present 5 and 6 and then open for questions. So perhaps if you've got questions then, Gareth can jump in and give us the details.
Yeah, that sounds a splendid idea. And just one other, we can leave that, Gareth, till later. It was just someone had asked a question about the housing associations and had all the housing associations been contacted. But if you like, we can leave that till later, Gareth.
I can quickly come in there, Chair, if you like.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we did get in touch with the housing associations just to ensure that everybody had been engaged with, and our Sustainable Energy Officer confirmed that she was working with everybody she was aware she should be working with.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good. We'll feed that back. Okay, just moving on, if no one else has got any questions on the minutes. Urgent items, Hannah. I don't think there are any.
No, I haven't been notified of any.
No, that's fine. Jolly good. Okay, we'll bat on because we've got a small window here. Kevin, do you want to lead us into a report?
Yes, Chair. I'm taking, I think the agenda has separated out my items. So I think you've got Seb in the room, and I'm going to do the general update, and then I'm going to ask Seb to just come in. Seb is our National Graduate Trainee, and he's been assigned onto the climate change work. So what I've asked him to do is to just pick up those specific elements which are around his work, which would be, I think, a useful update for members.
Kevin, do you want us any questions? Do you want us to kind of ask you before we go to Seb, or do you want us to hear the whole thing?
I think we'll take the whole thing,
okay.
And then as normal, I'm presenting on behalf of the team rather than just for myself. So if we then get any questions, the team can pick those up both in the room and online. I've got a number of slides, but I'm going to try and race through those, Chair, if I can get through them fairly swiftly, but the detail is in the paperwork. So I shall just kick off into that presentation. And just really in terms of what I wanted to cover was, I think we've skipped a meeting, so we've not just talked about the first year's summary report. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly, then just talk about the programme and pick up some highlights. And then I'm going to ask Seb to kick in. So I'll stop presenting online and Seb will pick things up from there. In terms of the work we've done around climate change, you'll remember that a motion was passed a number of years ago now, where as part of the action that members have given to the executive, that we would produce an annual report with detailed targets and actions within. This year was the first year that we've actually completed that task, and we've been able to produce a comprehensive report detailing the work we've done. That report is available on our website and sits alongside our strategy, and we intend to produce one every year showing progress. The key things I would pick out of the annual report is that the amount of carbon being generated within the borough or within the council has continued to drop year on year. So when we started, it was just over 6,178 tons of CO2. Last year, that was 5,326. And in the last year for the report, it was 5,028. So we've seen steady progress around the reductions in CO2. In terms of the whole borough, the data that we use for that comes from the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, otherwise known as BES. And they've been tracking that data since 2005. The graph on the screen shows progress over that period of time, and what we're able to see for the whole borough. I know that people are keen to see not just our own performance, but our performance as placed leaders across all sectors, that we've seen a 41.5% reduction in CO2 within the whole borough over the period of monitoring. In terms of rounding out this this municipal year, we've got next meeting is in March. We've currently got my update for Q3. This presentation is Q1 and 2, and we'll be talking about the refit work that our corporate property team have been taking forward. That said, in this, as all things to come, we will be talking about the London Road Charging Hub. We want to be talking about feedback and visits to the Oxford Charging Hub and the Basildon Charging Hub, which is to be scheduled. And then we'll be thinking about how we round out the rest of that programme. I just wanted members to see we've got some things on that forward plan, but obviously things to be added on as they occur. I just wanted to pick up in terms of my director highlights, some strategic themes which are worth or warrant a small conversation on and on highlight. I'm really talking about the whole borough and all of the council departments engaging in this work, and it's not just within my own directorate, but actually it's something that everyone in the organisation is committed to. So the first team who wanted to just be picked up is our public health team, and the link between public health and climate change is quite close, and each of the strategies talk to each other. Our public health funding has been supporting a number of our climate change projects. The most notable is our Eco Rewards Behaviour Change Initiative, which encourages active modes of travel. And I know that we've got some further information on that coming up tonight. But they've also funded the Green and Active Heroes, which is engaging with the voluntary sector around biodiversity and green activities. I've got a little bit more of that later on in the presentation. And improvement in air quality, funding monitoring equipment and resources to reduce the impact of poor air. And finally, they've also been funding work around improving housing quality and how people use their houses. In terms of business engagement, our climate change team have begun the process of engaging closely with and signposting local businesses, particularly interested in starting their own journey around climate mitigation. And Seb's going to talk a little bit more about his work as he's been focused around that business engagement piece. Internally, we've set up our own energy group, specifically looking at council facilities and seeing, are we maximising all of the tools which are available to reduce CO2 and energy consumption within our own buildings. That group's met a couple of times, and we've got a couple of likely prospects of things that we want to bring forward. On our forward plan, we've talked about the London Road Strong Heath site and the EV charging hub that we want to install at that site. A feasibility study has been completed in creating the EV charging hub, along with the dwell time activity. So what we've said is not just about a set of chargers, but we also want to see a shop, cafe, a changing rooms, toilet, a changing places toilet, and all of those other facilities which enables people to not only charge their vehicles, but to actually have some facilities while they're there. Chair, you'll remember that we went to the Oxford Charging Hub, and although that was very impressive, there wasn't a cafe, there wasn't anywhere to go to the toilet, and it really did disincentivise people from using that charging hub. So we've learnt that lesson, and it will be much more of a full service at that site. That work is continuing, and we expect that planning application to come forward in due course. My colleagues in Place Planning Regeneration have just brought to our attention that there's a change in the planning regulations, or in the building control regulations, and as of June, there has been a requirement under Part S of the regulations in terms of mandatory charging points for residential vehicles, residential developments. So that's adding to the capacity within the borough, because we'll see that actually that a number of properties will already have the charging capability available to them at home, in addition to the provisions we'll be putting into the borough. Staying within our Place Planning Regeneration, the local plan is in the final process of being adopted, and that will increase the provision of on-site renewable generation and overall energy efficiency. We're seeing that government are introducing a number of regulations which are driving down that path, and the local plan has those provisions in, and once that's adopted, they will kick in as part of our local provision. And in terms of the housing strategy, we are now at the point of delivering a new housing strategy that was agreed by the executive this week. And within the housing strategy, we're clearly using that strategy to drive to more energy efficient properties. And we're also working with our partners such as Silver Homes on bids about social housing decarbonisation, and in their efforts to refit their stock. Myself and the climate change team do meet with high-level directors of Silver Homes, and so we try and make sure that our plans are fully aligned and that we support where we can, and that they will be doing a presentation to this panel in the following months. So drilling into the detail of the highlight report, to remind members that there is 45 live projects and initiatives, and those are monitored by an internal board which is chaired by Damien James, our Assistant Director of Contract Services, and obviously we are supporting this panel in terms of having that oversight of the work that we've done. In terms of we seem to be focused on the place planning regeneration, but in terms of parks and countryside, the works that we've done around the highways and the rewilding of our grass verges, that has been a roaring success, and members also have seen our bumblebees in and around the borough. And really, I think this is an important aspect of not only keeping the borough safe, but also encouraging biodiversity. And that's been, as I said, a roaring success that we will continue with in future years. I talked a little bit in the strategic highlights of our work with public health around the Green and Active Heroes. It's a community scheme which is in partnership with Involve, and indeed increases green volunteering opportunities for residents, including tree planting, hedge laying and pond creation. Active volunteering within green spaces improves physical health and well-being, but also helps the local environment at the same time. Bringing people together is really important in terms of mental health, and feeling connected to the community, and doing it as part of a sustainable council strategy, I think is really important. We've got Neil Matthews on site, so I'm slightly cheating by talking about some of his area, but in terms of highways and transport, the launch of My Travel app has, for Bracknell Forest, allowed residents and employees to plan their travel in a much more sustainable way around the borough. The site hosts information on walking, cycling, buses, trains, and electric vehicle charging, and community transport, as well as helpful journey tools. You can sign up for that on their newsletter, and I know that Neil's about to talk after myself around some of that. And just keeping members up to date in terms of the community infrastructure around charging, 32 new charging residential points have now gone live. They commence in Q3, and those are low watt chargers which are aimed at overnight charging. Love to ride. Again, I think Neil's going to pick up more of the detail of that. I'll move on to the EV pool cars. We've now got 2 new Nissan Leafs, which have been added to the fleet. And so we've now got those as pool vehicles that staff can use and book for transport within the borough rather than using their own vehicles, which again is about reducing the carbon footprint within the borough itself. And again, on the highways work, we're in collaboration with our term contractor Ringway and starting a collaborative work to identify ways of reducing CO2 emissions associated with maintenance work, starting with compound use of the road surface. Moving more on to safer ground for myself, although you've got Damien in the room, so I need to be more careful in what I say. Performance around the council's food waste recycling service has remained strong throughout the first 2 quarters. The service has collected on average 2.4 kilograms of waste per household and has diverted over 2,700 tonnes of food waste from landfill this financial year. The service has begun efforts to introduce food waste collection for specific flats, with over 200 added to the service by the end of Q2. Feasibility studies for further additional flats is ongoing. For the 2nd year running, we've also been shortlisted and finalist for the National Recycling Awards. The ceremony was in December. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but the fact that we're in and around hunting at the top of the pack 2 years running will suggest that we're doing something incredibly well and consistently well. So this most recent roadshow saw our residents recycling 1.7 tonnes of small electrical items and 1.6 tonnes of clothing. All items collected can either be recycled or reused, or saving unnecessary landfill. And I know that Councillor Hayes was leading that charge in physically helping people collect that waste at our leisure centre. Again, on safer ground, a commercial property team, our property team, commercial centre redevelopment has stopped and started, but this is an update to one of our core buildings, and we're using all of our techniques and skills and knowledge around making the building more sustainably green, including PV cells on the roof and an EV charging point for electric vehicles, ready for our sort of larger fleet vehicles to need that facility. The executive approved a £1 million worth of building refit work to install low carbon technology and improve insulation of a number of buildings across the estate. This will not only reduce the CO2 in those buildings, but also our energy consumption. So we're looking at this as an investment to be able to, one, achieve our climate change objectives, but also as a sustainable budgeting process. We want to use that technology, use that experience to talk to our business community to show that actually it's worth investing in some of these technologies because there's a return on that investment. And we've submitted a pre-planned application for 7 new temporary homes for homelessness families, constructed to BREEAM Excellent Standard. That is Uplarden Way, and we're looking to bring that scheme forward in the next financial year. Energy efficiency, we've talked about public health, enabling residents to benefit from our warm and safe and well scheme. The scheme is part funded by the energy efficiency projects in homes of residents who are vulnerable to the effects of cold. Following a very prolonged wait to hear if BFC have been able to access the sustainable warmth funding, BES confirmed at the end of Q2 that we can attempt to allocate up to £1 million worth of funding. Targeted marketing will commence in Q3. Similarly, the delayed launch of the next phase of the energy company obligation, ECO4 funding, also allowed target marketing to commence here too in this quarter. And we were winners in the Local Authority of the Year Award and South East Efficiency Awards. Just picking up on those those schemes, the delay is not one of the council's making, but one of our funders. So in terms of BES, being able to not only announce those fundings available, but actually give us our earmarked sums, but also the marketplace being able to deliver some of those elements. And Chair, I know you had a number of questions, so I said Gareth Jones is online and we'll be able to pick those up. We did have a climate change conference, which was very well supported by the secondary schools in the borough. A number of points were made during that conference and a number of ideas were put forward. And based on those ideas, the council awarded each of the secondary schools in the borough a £500 award to kickstart their climate change projects. We're aiming to bring forward an annual conference of schools and hopefully being able to invest in those projects and see that there's been delivery against our objectives and what they've chosen to do for our objective. You'll remember that in our strategy that working with children and young people is absolutely key to making sure that we deliver on the overall strategy objective. And in terms of the Chief Exec's department, we've seen a return of the Forest Giants, which has been a roaring success in terms of bringing people into the town centre, but also an opportunity for us to talk about sustainable living and how to work in harmony with nature. This year, we added to those the Forest Guardians, where the sprites have been popping up around Lily Hall Park and other places. And they also featured in our campaign where we were supporting the Running Out of Time relay, which was a relay of a message from COP26 in Glasgow to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. And colleagues supported that baton relay, but also I think we made sure that we showed that Bracknell was in support of that message going to Sharm el-Sheikh. Our comms team have had 18 climate-related stories issued in April to September, along with a climate change newsletter for members. There's now a regular slot within Town and Country. In fact, we took a full page in Town and Country this term round, and we're currently developing behavioural tips and tricks for residents to encourage that sort of nudge approach to changing how we do things. I think, Chair, at that point, hopefully, Seb is going to take over.
Welcome, Seb.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the panel. I'll just share my presentation. I hope that's come up for you all now. Great. It's good to have the chance to come and present to you tonight.
All good.
Great.
All good.
Great. Okay. So as Kevin said, I'm one of the national management trainees on the National Graduate Development Programme here at Bracknell, and currently in a placement in the climate change team, which is running until the end of March. And just to make you aware, I will need to leave after doing the presentation and the following Q&A. I hope that's all right. So there's three sort of key elements of the work I'm doing in this placement, which I'll talk through this evening. Kevin's already touched on some of them. I wanted to start a bit by talking about some of the work I'm doing on the councils and the borough's emissions. I know Kevin's already touched on this a little, but just want to go into a bit more detail on the situation we're in at present. For anyone who isn't aware of the details of emissions measurement, you can generally divide your greenhouse gas emissions up into 3 different categories. So the Scope 1 emissions, which relate to emissions that occur directly in assets we own or operate. So that's things like gas being burnt in our boilers or fuel in our vehicles. There's Scope 2 emissions, which relate to energy that we're using from elsewhere, and particularly electricity. So the emissions that are being caused by our use of electricity. And finally, there's Scope 3, and those are emissions that we're causing, that we're responsible for, but that aren't directly happening in our assets and on our sites. So things like emissions involved in manufacturing goods that we buy. So at the moment, as a council, we're measuring Scope 1, Scope 2, and a tiny bit of Scope 3, and that's emissions due to water use. And as you can see, the biggest chunk of our emissions within those categories at the moment is actually from natural gas, followed by electricity. There's electricity in buildings and in streetlights. And the council fleet and water are responsible for comparatively tiny chunks of our current emissions profile. Kevin's already pointed out the decrease that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. That's mainly been driven by drops in electricity use and also in the amount of carbon that's being emitted per unit of electricity. A little bit more on Scope 3. So, as I said, this is currently unreported by Bracknell Forest Council, aside from the emissions linked to water use. But we know it's likely to be a significant element of our emissions, possibly as much as or more than half. And there's likely to be increasing pressure to report on this in the future as more attention is paid to Scope 3. But Scope 3 emissions are also much more complicated, much harder to measure and to project. We are going to be trying to make an attempt as part of my placement to see if we can start to make some estimates of our current Scope 3 emissions, and we'll be looking at some of the categories that you can see on the right there. Again, I think you've seen a similar graph from Kevin already, but a bit more detail on the borough emissions. You can see a clear drop from the start of the data that we've got from Bayes in 2005. And you can see that's driven, among other things, by drops in domestic and commercial emissions. And we know that a portion of that is likely to be due to the decarbonisation of the electricity grid. In that time, we've had a lot of renewable energy added to the grid. So that's where we are at the moment. But my project is focusing on trying to work out how things are going to go in the future, and mapping out a little bit how those emissions values, both for the council and for the borough, could change under different scenarios. And that'll help us see if we're on track to meet our net zero targets, and will also help us if we do decide to set any interim targets to measure our progress against. And the likelihood is that we will end up identifying some emissions that we're unlikely to be able to mitigate, even by 2050, and that there will be a need then to look at how we can offset those. But we should know more once this piece of work's been done. Just a bit on some of the other projects I'm doing as well. So I've been doing some work on parish and town council engagement. We're keen to build up some better links between the borough council and parish and town councils. So our focus there in particular is on supporting them to measure their own emissions as a starting point. 2 of them have already done so, and we're currently in the process of supporting the remaining 4. And they have been sent a guide, and we'll be offering continuing support. But we are also looking for other opportunities to cooperate and to support. And a little bit on the business work that Kevin's touched on as well. So we know that there are many businesses in the borough who are keen to start making themselves more environmentally friendly and taking some sort of action, but also that many of them are finding it quite difficult to know where to start. We know that as of last year, only comparatively few have actually put fixed targets in place with dates to work towards net zero. And we know that many of them are facing other big challenges at the moment in terms of the economic situation. So we're keen to work out if there's anything the council can do in terms of signposting and facilitation and advice to try and help kickstart some action by some local businesses, because we know that's a key part of the jigsaw in terms of decarbonising the borough as a whole. So what I'm doing at the moment is working on a bit of a strategy for the climate change team to guide our activities over the next 5 years or so in this area, and preparing the ground a bit for a business event that's likely to take place after the local elections in May, but should hopefully serve as a chance to kick off some of this engagement work. and we're also working with some key partners there as well. So the Economic and Skills Development Partnership and the Bracknell Business Improvement District. So that's everything from me. I very welcome any questions, any feedback, either now or do get in touch if anything occurs to you later.
Okay. Seb, that's very impressive. Thank you very, very much. And I'm sure members have got questions. We'll probably back the questions, Kevin, as we've got all that in our mind with Seb, and then come back to you if we may. Seb, just on those calculations of carbon stuff, one thing I don't understand in doing this, is there a set formula that is used across everything? So when you go to the parish councils, for instance, you just give them a formula to work it out. How does that work?
So there are set procedures, set standards, and the guide we've prepared for parish and town councils tries to distill the most important elements of some of those. And those are also, broadly speaking, the guides and standards that we use ourselves. Those do involve making a lot of different choices, particularly for larger and more complex organisations. So for a parish or a town council, it's often fairly simple, but an organisation of our complexity, there can be more questions as to what we count. For example, in relation to outsourced services or buildings that we own but are leasing out. So there's a degree of variation there from organisation to organisation in where they set the boundaries of what they're measuring. But the important thing is to pick a consistent standard within what's permitted by the guidelines and then stick to it so you know you're measuring the same thing year to year.
I watched a programme the other day about shipping, not that we're near the coast, but nevertheless. But the oil that the ships are using apparently is the most toxic of anything else that we can produce. Is that something you've thought of? Because they obviously it goes in the air, but they've said this is outrageous, the stuff they're using. It's right at the bottom of the oil barrel.
I'm aware, I think, of the issues around some of those very dirty emissions from ships. It's not something that I'm looking at for this work because it's, well, for a start, I think those emissions tend not to be allocated to specific subnational areas. And also we are, as you say, we're not a coastal area, so we don't have any ports or anything that would be directly involved in those industries. But as a wider issue, it is something I'm aware of.
Let me just open this up to other people. Ian.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could go back to the Director's report on page 15, which deals with the emissions, I think. I was wondering if yes, it's a chart on page 15, the Climate Change Annual Report. Do we have any idea, Director, of what has resulted in that decrease? Is there any particular item or set of circumstances that's caused that?
Chair, I think Seb just answered that, but Seb, did you just want to repeat that on your slide you just talked through the detail of the breakdown and what you think's changed to bring our numbers down?
Yes, of course. So when you break the data down, that decrease is really being driven by a decrease in the emissions from our electricity use. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, we've just been using less electricity. There's been a drop over the last couple of years. And secondly, the electricity that the grid's providing us is also becoming greener. So as more renewable energy comes on stream, the carbon that's emitted for each unit of electricity we're consuming drops. That really is the key driver. Our natural gas usage has actually increased slightly over that time.
When you say our, do you mean the boroughs or the councils?
So this is specifically the council emissions that we're talking about, and the graph that Kevin showed there was just our emissions. The borough emissions are also decreasing, and we've got data there for over a longer time.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The reason I asked the question is that it says on there borough emissions, and I assumed that was emissions over the borough and not just the councils. Yes.
Yeah, Chair, if I could just jump in at that point, I think Councillor Leake is absolutely right, and I think what has tended to happen is because we talk about the borough as the council and then the borough as the area. I know that a number of groups have said, well, the council's only ever measuring itself, but surely it should be measuring the whole of the community. I think we need to find a way of changing the language around that, but one is our own and one is the footprint of the Bracknell Forest area. So the slide 16 in your pack is just talking about the council itself.
I wouldn't have thought it would be too difficult just to say the borough's council emissions, because when you talk about the borough, most people will think of the whole of the area.
Yeah, Chair, I completely get that, and I think we might just want to say council. Well, council and council area. We need to find a different way of describing it so people recognise that one is ourselves and one is the whole of the community.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm sure we can work on that.
Could I just jump in a second, because I think this is really important, that point, Kevin, because we get a lot of criticism here that we just look at our own house and we don't worry about the rest of the community. And I think that we do, but we do need to make that terribly clear to everybody else that we are looking at both.
Yeah.
So you said looking at the borough or looking at the council?
So I've been looking at, I've been looking at both. The work is sort of focusing on both, and we'll hope to have some scenarios for how both are likely to evolve going forward.
Thank you. Sorry.
My next question generates from a comment on page 23, where you talk about the work with our partners, such as Silver Homes. Are we working with any, which of course is now an independent housing association, are we working with other housing associations as well as Silver Homes? And obviously I don't expect you to necessarily list them now, but if we are, then I think they should be included in the report. So are we working with any others?
So, Chair, the detail, so the simple answer is yes, we are working with others. The detail of who those housing association or the registered providers are is in the detail of the housing strategy, which went to the executive this week. So the housing strategy is a fairly lengthy document. So I'm only just highlighting that we are working with partners. The reason we've highlighted Silver Homes is that we've actually got a much closer relationship from the climate change team with Silver Homes on the fact that we've been working around decarbonisation bids together, because we can leverage the finance, but they've got the stock. So we've been putting in joint bids, and so the two management teams have been meeting fairly regularly to talk through what the art of the possible is, whereas for the other partners, because they're not so heavily in the borough, they're finding other local authority to put their bids through. So the details in the strategy document, but we work with Silver Homes because we've got the closest, well, we've mentioned Silver Homes because we've got the closest relationship with them.
I understand that historical relationship, obviously, but I do think it's important that if we are working with or encouraging other housing associations, I think it's important that that's highlighted, because otherwise there may be an impression given that sort of they are working in isolation and we're not too bothered about that. And I think it's important that we deliver a consistent message across the whole cohort. That's all. Thank you.
I'll take that point on board, and we'll make that clearer in our next annual report, Chair.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Tina. Tina, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, so I am. Sebastian, as a quick question back to you. You're working in conjunction with parish councils and town councils, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Good. Crowthorne Parish Council has a 3-year strategy, and part of that 3-year strategy is the climate change, how we can combat it. And part of it also is air quality. We've got a high street, and at one point, our high street's air quality was pretty poor. So, are you in touch with our project manager there, Liz Turkington?
Thank you for raising this. Yeah, I've been down to Crowthorne to meet with Liz, and we've discussed the action plan and some of the air quality measures as well. And they have also taken up the offer to look at measuring their emissions with our support. So the conversations
That is
are ongoing.
very encouraging. That is very encouraging. Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Seb, can I just ask you a question about air quality? I know that we've got certain machines to measure that, don't we, around the borough? But I just wondered if we've got enough machines to tell us how the whole general picture of the borough is going.
So to be honest, air quality is my area of expertise. More focused on greenhouse gas emissions, but I can follow up on that with the relevant team. If that
Chair, it's slightly outside of Seb's remit, but
Yeah.
I think if you nudge Damien's beside you, he might be able to just give you a little bit more of a fill-in.
He's desperate to speak, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you might be aware of the grant funding that we've had for the public protection to look at air quality across actually 3 boroughs, but we're part of that tri-borough bid. And we were successful in receiving some funding, and we're working on a project at the moment measuring air quality in various locations, more sensitive locations, particularly around schools. We're looking at, and we are gathering data as we speak, actually, on that.
That is fantastic news, actually. And when do you think we would have that data?
I suspect it will be in a good couple of months, so probably after the election. What you might see in the next couple of weeks is some posters and information going up actually around those sensitive spots, encouraging people who might be idling, for example, to turn off their engines. And we are working with our partners, our car parking contractor partners, NSL. So they've received some training from our air quality staff in public protection to look at education in terms of speaking to drivers who are idling outside those sensitive areas to encourage them to turn off their engines. And we've got leaflets that we can give out to give more information on why they shouldn't be idling in those locations.
That's good news too. And of the schools I've seen, actually, I think there's less people doing this now than used to be. But anyway.
Just to carry on
Dorothy.
from that, we had the competition of the bumper stickers, and the schools came on amazingly well with that, and to the extent where parents are more aware of it, because the younger persons are saying to their parents, you shouldn't sit and have these. And I spent yesterday afternoon round Askerteeth School, and it was quite apparent that the message is getting through.
Thanks, Dorothy. I'm just coming to you, John, but I'm going to Mary first. Mary.
Thank you. Kevin, in your report, there was a bit of, it was a bit confusing. You said we've won 2 grants, and we can go out to tenders with the assumption that those grants are coming forward. So have we got the grants, and can we put them in order? And it was as if they're in they're virtual, but they're not real. And I'm sick of virtual.
So, Chair, I'm going to start, and then Gareth Jones is going to then tidy up my clumsy explanation. So, we've been grant funded by central government on a number of different grants. The last grant that we applied for around warm homes, there was some confusion with government whether they would let us have the money or not. Then they did let us have the money, and then there was a bit of more shenanigans. So I'll let Gareth give you the full chapter and verse, because he's lived and breathed it, unfortunately, and can give us a full SP. But Gareth, did you want to just pick up the detail, please?
Yeah, if Chair's happy for me to come in there, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, I presume Councillor Templeton is referring to the housing grant specifically, and on that basis.
Yes, she is.
Yes, thank you very much. On that basis, so there has been for want of a better word, a procession of various named grants that have been made available by the government that tend to be bracketed under the Green Homes Grant banding. So we, if I go right back, the first tranche of Green Homes Grant funding, we put in a bid as a standalone authority. We were successful and got some money. We attempted to do the same for the second tranche of money, which was known as Local Authority Delivery 2, but we were unsuccessful. Shortly after that, we were invited to join in with a more successful Berkshire-wide bid, and we were allocated a little bit of money within LAD 2. From memory, it was circa 80 something thousand pounds eventually, and we managed to identify. So our role there with that grant money was to identify suitable homes to put forward to a managing agent who are operating the scheme within the Berkshire area. We were asked to identify homes. They then took over, surveyed those homes, and worked out what works were possible. We only, because it was a relatively small amount of money, we think we've only benefited from around 12 properties or so receiving retrofit works from that money. We are actually still waiting for those final figures. That scheme closed in September last year, but the scheme outcomes have yet to be released to any local authorities, so we can't give you actual confirmed numbers. And then on the back of LAD 2, there was another scheme called LAD 3, Local Authority Delivery 3, which also we went in and tried to bid as a standalone authority. We are unsuccessful. After a very lengthy delay with that one, where we had expressed an interest in joining up with a Berkshire-wide consortia who did have money, Bayes took a long time to deliberate as to whether Bracknell Forest could be part of that Berkshire-wide consortia, and they finally gave us that nod in September or October last year, which then led to us trying to do some really rapid target marketing, much as we did with the LAD 2 scheme. Our task there was, can we identify the kinds of homes and the kinds of residents that meet the criteria for this money to be spent? And we're talking for Bracknell, there was up to £1 million to be spent. So we spent all of the period leading up to Christmas doing our target marketing work. We believe we identified a sufficient number of homes for the managing agent to then take forward, and they now have contractors hopefully delivering those works on the ground through this quarter that we're in at the moment. Again, that scheme is supposed to end at the end of March this year, and we will get some outcome figures thereafter. But I highlight the delay I mentioned earlier. We don't yet know how successful we were with the LAD 2 monies, and so I suspect there will be a slight delay with LAD 3 again. And then if I look forwards down the line, there is something called the Home Upgrade Grant, which is looking to support homes that are specifically off gas grid. We again have expressed an interest in being part of a Berkshire-wide consortia on that one from the outset. We've decided not to go as an individual authority. We said we'd like to join up with a Berkshire-wide bid, and Bayes are currently considering all of those applications for money that have come in, and then we'll make a notification as to whether Berkshire is successful with that one going forward. I'm sorry that's quite lengthy, and there may be some follow-ups.
Can I just thank you for all of this? Wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have all these pots to fill in and then all these failures? Because all the effort in trying to put forward the most important thing going at the moment, and then all of a sudden there's bound to be failures. Some will be successful, some will be failures. And all this effort, I read this week, it costs about 30k for every application. And for every application, that's wasted money. And nobody has wasted money. So I say, it's not you, I'm not getting at you, I'm thanking you for having the patience and to the resilience to keep going. Because it's from what you say, it's really not easy. I mean, you still don't know whether you got what they got out of September. But can I just talk to Seb, please? First of all, thank you, I'm a chemist, for writing CO2 correctly, right? Secondly, because that's been my bugbear forever, because it's not cobalt twice, it's CO2, yeah? So really pleased for that, thank you. And also, have we turned down the heating on this building like everyone else has turned down the heating? Because if we've turned down the heating, we should see a massive drop next time round on the amount of energy and all the stuff we've come out.
Chair, I'm not sure that's a fair question to ask the graduate trainee.
I think
All right,
Damien's
well, I'm
going
sure
to
he does. Damien will help.
Damien's going to do it.
Well, Kevin will probably know the exact number actually more than I do, because Kevin has kind of the property responsibility under his banner as well as myself. But I believe we have is the short answer. But Kevin might know more detail. I'm not sure.
Chair, I'm not going to know the detail, but Hash Patel, energy manager, under the direction of the executive, particularly Councillor Harrison, I should call Councillor Harrison that. So we have been sneakily turning the heating down in the building to the point that people squeak, and then we turn it up a little bit. So we actually have seen a reduction, but we also are mindful of the fact that the regulations do set a lower threshold. So we don't want to go down to 16 degrees, but we do want to make sure that we maximise the use of energy in the building. So we've turned down the heat. If anyone's seen Kame Tor wandering around every so often wearing a coat, looking very distressed, she's Hash's boss. So she's our barometer if it's too low. And we also turn the lighting down. So we've taken a percentage of the lighting grid down across the building as well. So we're trying to get any efficiency we can, but we do it to the point where people will say, actually, that's a bit too low, and then we move it up 1%. And we think we're encouraging residents to do that as well. Turn your heating down by 1 degree and see if you notice. And at the point you notice, move it up 1 degree, and that's maximising your thermostat use.
Thanks, Kevin.
Can I just come back on then because if Seb is managing to take a measure of the borough of Bracknell Forest, proof, not just the council, but the borough, I am quite sure that over this winter and the cost of energy, one of the possibly the only thing that was good about it is the fact that people have reduced their energy, and therefore we should have lower carbon dioxide outpouring than we have had before.
I'd agree with that suspicion. I think that's very likely. It will be quite some time before we know, because we are dependent on BEIS to compile those estimates for us, and those tend to take some time before they get released to the public. But when those do come through, I'd expect to see exactly the trend that you're suggesting.
Thanks, Joe. No, just to add on to Seb's comment, you'll see from the report the last data we've got from BEIS is for 2019, so it does work a number of years behind where we are at the moment. So,
thank you.
I don't know if John Harrison is still online, because he put his hand up, but it's disappeared, so he might well have left us, maybe. But I know
Mine's
Tina's
collapsing.
desperate.
Yes,
Yeah.
mine is collapsing.
Keep going, Tina.
Can we just can we go back, please, to the air quality on our streets? I've just sent you, Kevin and Damien and Tony and Dot, a bollard pocket. It's a what do you call them? Like a, I can't remember. There's a specific word, but you drop it over the bollard, and it said, this is what I saw in Sunnyhill the other day, that they are really, really disturbed about the air quality around the schools. And that's what they've done to ensure that the schools and the parents dropping their kids off do turn off their engines. I think it's a really good thing. It's a cheap, cheerful way of reminding everybody. Tony, I'm sure you've got that email now. Damien, I know Kevin is probably looking for it. But anyway, it's a good thing. It's an easy thing. It's a cheap thing, but it is a reminder to parents and people, turn off that engine.
Yeah, no, it's
Thanks,
point well made, Tina. And I think there's obviously our legislation so that we can take action if we need to, Damien, can't we? That's all gone through council, so.
yes, we can enforce, and we have a similar, as I said before, we've got a similar sign. Ours are actually attached to lampposts, so you'll see those popping up around the borough. And yeah, very similar. The message is similar. It's about discouraging idling and you know, everyone having kind of that additional bit of education as to why.
Thank you, Damien. I think in many cases the problem could be alleviated further by actually walking to school, because I know that some parents drive relatively short distances, so that's something we need to activate as well.
We'll pick that with Neil as well. Okay, I think that's the questions. Can I just say thank you also, Kevin, for that roundup, because it was really interesting, to be honest. It's great to see the council using solar cells. I thought that was fantastic, to be honest with you. That's good. And I wanted to ask a question or something that we can bear in mind for the committee, because the children that you had that show for, exhibition for, whatever, could be invited to this panel one time. So, do you want to say something?
What we could do is individually, because they each were attained a £500, not so much an award, but something they could contribute to going on with further work. So those that are succeeding, we could ask them would they like to send papers in, and we can see how well they're doing.
So perhaps someone could do that. I don't mind doing it, but someone could pick that up.
Do that.
Okay.
Yes.
And one other thing I was going to ask you about the bumblebee little signs. Is that open for anyone that's done, wildflower seeding or stuff? Can we, if people have done it in areas, can they get a sign, Kevin?
I bet Damien's going to answer that one.
Yep.
Unless Dot jumps in. Damien.
I'm happy to pick it up. So I think the short answer would be yes. We'd love to see more bumblebee signs around the borough. They're a great way of communicating rewilding areas and areas which we will leave untouched. There is obviously a small cost to the sign, and someone has to put it into the ground and make sure it's stable and safe and all the rest of it. But subject to that being met, then absolutely don't see why not.
Yep. I'll come. I spent Friday with Wildlife of Ascot, and we were clearing a site for wildflowers, and I had one of the bumblebee signs in the car, and they immediately came up and said, "Oh, after we finish the work, which we're going, after 2.5 hours of digging in my wellies, which I'll send around the pictures, yes, it was something we can really get into on that as well. Yeah, no problem."
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all the people who spoke there. It's nice to see someone young and scientific. And what can I say? Thank you, Seb, very much for all that. And good luck with the rest of it. Thank you, Kevin. We'll just move on, if we may. Thank you, Damien, for your input. And we'll say good afternoon to Neil. We hope.
Good evening, Chairman, and the panel.
Good evening. Okay. All right. Neil, before you start, can I ask you just a question before you get going on this, on the strategies and stuff? I was going to ask this, Kevin, more directly to you. The compound that we are now filling holes with, I remember seeing something in Yorkshire where they're using recycling material to do it. Are we doing similar stuff on that level?
We are. There are lots of materials on the market at the moment, and there's many still in the testing phase. So we don't know yet in the long term which ones will prove to be the best. But we have used recycled materials, and this year our resurfacing programme included almost exclusively lower temperature asphalt. So that's warm asphalt as opposed to hot. So at the batching plant, it's created using less energy, therefore less CO2. It actually cools quicker and can be trafficked quicker. So one questions why the industry hasn't developed this option before, but that's been rolled out as standard from now. There are no disbenefits to it. But as for other materials, yeah, it's a trial and error phase at the moment, but I'm sure they will feature as standard too in the long term.
Great. Okay. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. I've got a presentation here just to get the conversation going. I'll just check that everyone can see this full screen. I think you can now. Okay. Well, a few facts to get us started about walking and cycling in the borough. We've got around 535 kilometres of footway, around 100 kilometres of traffic-free cycleway. Much of that is within urban areas, and some of the best examples of the infrastructure are actually around Bracknell town itself, and that's because a lot of that was planned in when Bracknell was developing as a new town. So we have subways, we have segregated facilities, something which you couldn't retrofit these days, and in many ways we're actually the envy of other authorities being a new town, because we have those assets that are so difficult to provide in the modern day. We've also got the NCN 422, the National Cycle Network, that runs east to west across the whole borough. It connects in at the Cobby Beach roundabout with Wokingham, right the way through the borough along the London Road, connects up to Maidenhead, around Heatherwood roundabout. That was installed around about the time we were regenerating the town centre, so it connects into the town, also dissects other cycle routes, connects into business areas, the town, and also rail, bus interchange. We've got over 100 formal crossing facilities for peds and cycles, so traffic light crossings we're talking about here. And we developed a number of schemes over the years that we've built through our Highways and Transport Capital Programme. It's pretty standard now that we have a number of these schemes coming forward each year. Many of them actually been developed locally, or certainly the concepts. Local members have raised ideas, users have come forward as demand increases, and we've always managed to find an engineering solution, I think, to most of the difficult sites. We've trained 3,000 children, cycle training. Used to be called Cycle Proficiency. It's now branded Bikeability. It's funded centrally through government. Year 6 pupils all get offered this through our work with schools. We have term time courses, holiday courses as well, but take-up's been really good, and the statistics are growing. And talking about statistics, this is a snapshot. Let's not focus too much on the absolute numbers here, but our trends from surveys that we've done within the borough at 30 set locations that we observe every year, we have done for the last 10 years, show that walking and cycling, certainly walking, is up about 59% from what it was 10 years ago, and cycling up by 9%. Now, as I say, got to caveat those numbers because it's a snapshot. We're not surveying the whole borough. We take it more of a trend than an absolute number. But when you look at that against the national statistics for that 10-year period, walking trips are up by 25%, and cycling trips are actually down by 10%. So, like I say, not necessarily comparing apples with apples, but I think what that gives us is a good indication that there's a positive trend. Right, enough about the facts. This is the beginning of perhaps the section, the presentation that you came here tonight for, which is to talk about walking and cycling strategy. And this slide here is showing you how government see walking and cycling in a strategic sense. A few years back, the government created the Cycling and Walking Investment Strategy, which set out how they were going to fund walking and cycling improvements in future years, what the aspirations were, and one of those key aspirations was to encourage or to create a situation where the majority of short trips were undertaken by foot or by bike. As we moved into the COVID pandemic, that coincided with the development of, or the introduction of, the Active Travel England funding body, which government created to govern the funding that it was going to provide to enable that objective to be achieved. And government see that as being, or that investment strategy being delivered by local authorities, local transport plans and their cycling walking strategies, delivering a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. That's government's vision as to how we will ensure that infrastructure is delivered across the country. I'm going to come back to the LCWIP, as it's abbreviated, and that'll make it easier for me for the rest of the presentation a little bit later on. But just taking a step back to what we say in our local transport plan about cycling. We have a policy 8, which combines walking and cycling, and it basically says these things, that we will improve infrastructure where we can for walking and cycling. We'll ensure that the needs of pedestrians and cyclists are included within new development. We'll improve green infrastructure to make walking and cycling more attractive. We'll make it safer for walking and cycling. And we'll market walking and cycling as a healthy, sustainable and attractive travel choice. Now, this is in our Local Transport Plan 3, which will be superseded by Local Transport Plan 4, probably in a couple of years. Government are asking authorities to refresh that. But I think those themes are still very current. Now, just looking at those individually, walking and cycling infrastructure, well, as I've mentioned, we deliver a number of schemes each year through our capital programme, some of them specifically for walking and cycling, crossing facilities, cycle paths, but we also weave in those facilities within wider transport improvements. So those larger strategic schemes that you've seen implemented on the A322, the A329 and the A3095 have all included those other modes, including walking and cycling, so that the motorised transport doesn't become dominant in those schemes, and that we're actually taking the opportunity to get communities in a position where they can cross safely and comfortably those strategic roads that previously were a barrier. And that's all building upon that strong network that we've got. New development, well, I would say that walking and cycling is key from the very start of considering development proposals, and certainly for the larger development sites, the master planning phase will include clear aspirations as to how we're going to connect those developments to facilities, amenities, and the wider borough. And a key also is to have a quality of facility that means that when those new residents move in to those areas, that they choose, well, it would be nice to say all, but at least some of their journeys to be non-motorised. And that's about making it easy, that's about making it attractive, that's making it almost from your front door, or literally from your front door. We can take developer contributions to improve wider connections, so not just those within the sites themselves, but also to the infrastructure needed to connect them with those facilities and town centre, and etc. And we also place obligations on those developers to deliver travel plans which are about promoting, encouraging and ensuring we get, as far as we can possibly control it, that behaviour change, or those good behaviours from the start. Green infrastructure, also important. I mean, we have some really good examples of green infrastructure in the borough. We have Swinley Forest, prime example, but we're also finding that developers are recognising the value of green infrastructure as part of their developments, not just ours. It makes them attractive to residents. And that's another way of getting people to walk and cycle more. And if you can do that in a leisure context, you can start to get people's minds to think about the utility trips that they can start to take on foot or by bike. May start as that short trip to the shops, could turn into a commuting trip, and then you've got that sort of behaviour hooked. Improving safety, we touched on bikeability. For cycle training, we've also got pedestrian training that we roll out to Key Stage 1 and 2 pupils. But it's not just about education, it's also about tackling specific problems that we can identify. And many members here will know that we analyse our accident statistics that are provided to us by the police, and we look at the road safety risks that residents and members share with us, and we identify ourselves. And we implement targeted road safety schemes that are all about making walking and cycling as safe as possible, because that is part of the solution. It's giving that confidence to people that they can walk and cycle. I mean, specifically when you're talking about school children, it's having the confidence amongst parents that their child can safely walk and cycle to school. But it goes beyond just crossing the road. It also goes to being able to park your bike safely in an area where you feel comfortable, where it's lit, where you think your bike's going to be safe, and so on. I've been talking about infrastructure quite a lot so far, so I just want to pause for a moment and talk about funding. What this slide shows along the top here is all the funding streams that come into the council, which can be put towards improvements in walking and cycling infrastructure. So we've got the Active Travel Fund. If you remember a few slides ago, we talked about the government's investment strategy and the setting up of the Active Travel Body, which was to distribute that funding. Well, that money, as you can see here, can only be spent on schemes that are identified in the local walking and cycling infrastructure plan, which I'm going to touch on a little bit later. It can't be used on other general improvements that aren't specifically part of that plan. But we've got other monies. So we get a grant from government for transport improvements. We get a grant from government each year for maintenance of the highways. That money can be spent on a wider range of cycle infrastructure. The local cycling walking infrastructure plan, yes, but also other emerging demands that we see locally that we need, safety improvements. Similarly, with Section 106 receipts from developers and community infrastructure levy payments from developers, we can target that money towards cycle infrastructure. It could be wider improvements beyond the development site to improve connectivity, where the borough is best placed to deliver those schemes or take a contribution towards schemes which will be funded by multiple developers. And finally, we've got money, we've got developers actually delivering with their own money direct those facilities within their sites or immediately adjacent where we don't need to deliver it, the developer's contractor will. So this local cycling and walking infrastructure plan, the LCWIP, just to talk a bit more about that because it's quite important. Government developed this initiative because they wanted to identify an evidence-based, high-quality cycling and walking improvements at a local level. There you go. There's the strap line that I've read out at the top. It's a gap analysis tool. DFT see this as an opportunity for local authorities to scientifically, if you like, identify the areas where there is a propensity, the greatest propensity for a shift towards walking and cycling, so that schemes are recognisable as having value and benefit by local communities, have the potential to shift patterns, travel patterns. We already have a local cycling walking infrastructure plan because it was introduced some years ago by Department for Transport. It only covers the urban areas at the moment, but GFT have asked authorities to update them. They've also provided some money to do so. So at the moment, we're reviewing our plan, not just for perhaps the more scientific schemes that the Department for Transport wants to identify, but all of the schemes that we feel are worthy that we could deliver as a council, and to expand that plan so that it covers the whole borough, not just the urban areas. So we've got one composite plan of cycle infrastructure improvements. Now, they won't all be funded, but some of those we'll be able to bid to Active Travel, the Active Travel Body, where it meets their criteria. Others we will be able to line up with those various funding streams that I've shown you on the previous slide. Now, we've been working with the public and town and parish councils on some input to the new local cycling walking infrastructure plan. And what you can see here on the right is the responses that received to an online platform that we set up last year, enabled residents to pinpoint the issues and opportunities that they saw existed in the borough relating to walking and cycling infrastructure. And we got 2,653 contributions from 525 respondents. So the red dots here are not individual responses, they're clusters. But you can see we've got pretty good coverage when you think about certainly the urban areas of Bracknell, but even the rural areas that you can see we've got a pretty good spread. So the task we're at now is to work through those, analyse the suggestions, match that against engineering opportunities and practicalities to see where we can fulfil those demands, and then weave those into that LCWIP process. And hopefully that will trigger some external funding from government, but it will certainly also help us target our own funding. But it's very much not just about infrastructure. A shift towards walking and cycling is about in many cases, getting residents, employees to use the infrastructure that's there at the moment. There is a lot out there, and it is underused in many places, if not most places, to be fair. And we have a range of promotional work streams to try and get that shift. One you're looking at here, unfortunately, I can't play you the video that I was hoping to at the bottom, which features Councillor Turrell, our executive member for Planning and Transport, because I don't think that the broadband width will allow me to do it. But there are a series of videos online that please take a look, which depict everyday scenarios where people can make a shift from the motorised transport to walking and cycling, and it's all about getting that thought process going. We also promote some circular walking and cycling routes. These are across the borough. These are designed to give people that taster of a walking and cycling experience that they wouldn't ordinarily have. Probably mostly leisure routes when you look at where they are and what they're connecting, but they might also instill that idea of another journey that someone could make up that exists at the moment via a car. I think printed leaflets of these, they also appear online. They're also signed on street and colour coded with stickers that appear on the lamp columns so that you can follow them as you go. And as mentioned earlier, we have some other incentivisation schemes. So Eco Rewards is one, and there's an image down there of a pupil that's on their way to school with a token, and what they're doing there is they're dabbing it on a receiver on a lamp column, and what that enables the scheme to do is to record a journey that a child's made to school on foot or by bike, which generates points. Those points equal prizes in that it equals discounts to be able to use to shop online. It also generates inter-school competitions as to how many school trips each school can generate and where they fit on the leaderboard. And Love to Ride, which is a similar scheme, but it's about getting people out on their bikes, recording the miles that they ride. 4 miles equals prizes, again, discounts. It's not completely self-financing, this approach, but we have been working with the Berkshire Local Enterprise Partnership and secured some funding, which has enabled us to work with the providers to deliver this scheme. I mean, in part it's subsidised, but there is an element of cost. So it's been very popular, and there's a number of schools that have signed up and are involved. And then more recently, we've set up the My Journey portal, which is an online tool, a personalised travel planning tool, I think is the best way to describe it. It's live. We're still refining it, but the idea is that you will be able to put in start and finish points and look at the different mode choices that you have to make that journey. You can do it right now, and it'll show you the options available to you. But what we're trying to refine is our infrastructure mapped into the portal so that it can give you the closest representation of a journey that you can take by foot or by bike using the latest infrastructure that we've created. So that's quite an exciting area, work in progress. So, Chairman, I think that's probably a flavour to get us all talking. As you can see, there is quite a broad range of actions underway to fulfil the strategy, and the strategy, I think, although it will be reviewed in the coming 2 years as part of our local transport plan for development, is still on point, and still some very exciting work there.
Neil, thanks very much. I don't know if members have all read this strategy, but I think it's a brilliant strategy. So I'd like to thank your team for putting this together as well. I know you've done it, and you're a cyclist, so hey, it says it all. But also, I think it's easy to read, and I think there's a kind of lesson to everybody there to make it easy to read for the public and not too corporate. I'll start off the questions and then I'll pass it to the members. The first question is maybe a silly question, but a lot of people have said it's really, I find this hard to believe, but they find it hard to find the cycle lanes. Some are very well, identified, some aren't. But in London, they have blue tarmac on everything, which I think it catches the eye straight away. I'm not suggesting, perhaps I am suggesting that we actually paint them blue, but you know what I mean. I just wondered if there should be a sort of a stronger identification which might help. Shall I bat these questions to you? And
I certainly see the concept. I think the challenge would be that we have so much already as infrastructure. A lot of that is woven into shared footway, cycleways, for example, which are provided wherever we've got enough width to do so. So going back to those statistics at the beginning of the presentation, with that kilometrage of facility, I think that would be a mighty task for us to sort of point it out. What I would say, though, is that what we do to help people identify, because I hear your point, people, I didn't know that was there, I didn't know I could have that connection through that. We do have a borough-wide map showing all of the connecting cycle routes, which gets updated. It's online at the moment. I looked at it earlier. So you can actually look at that borough map, look at where you want to get to, and actually see the cycle routes, the roads which they go through. Not marked on the ground, but I mean, that may even be a more efficient way of identifying your journey, because you can do it in one hit from your chair or from a desk, rather than perhaps going out and working on trial and error.
One of the things that people have also mentioned, and I think Reading have done this, and I don't know if we could do it, but going back to your point about there isn't enough people cycling, really, and therefore it's difficult to put infrastructure in if it's not going to be used because we've got other priorities. So it's really tough. But I think, have closed roads around schools. And as such, people then find it easier to go in and go out. Some of our roads are not, I know that's really tough, but, I just wondered if you thought of that, if that's possible. And looking at schools, obviously all individuals are going to be different, but it just seemed quite a good idea, apart from probably clogging up Bracknell's roads.
Yeah, I think you're referring to School Streets, which was an initiative that started in the metropolitan areas, and I think if you went to London, Manchester, Liverpool, large cities like that, you would see those schemes where perhaps the challenges are greater in terms of the conflicts between vehicles and school children. It is a question of balance. I mean, our schools are well connected, I would say. There's a lot of work's been done in the past to get those facilities, walking and cycling facilities, to the school gate. And I would say we've achieved that in the majority of cases. The challenge is probably more so in the rural areas, which is something that, Joanna, you and I've discussed a lot in the past, which is where there is more work definitely to be done. But I would say that we probably don't have the levels of conflict that would outweigh the complexity that those schemes can bring in terms of who can drive through those streets at that time. Because you really are rerouting vehicles around so that because they cannot drive through that school street during that school start and finish time. So I would say, no, we can't exclude anything moving forward, because if we're actually going to make a change, we've got to embrace new ideas and be bold. I just think that it's each case on its own merits, I think.
Okay, and just one last question. I'll hand this to another member. Do we have any targets for all this? I know that obviously we'll put more infrastructure in when we get more money, and this might be 106, it might be grants, whatever. But do we have any targets for, because I noticed on the, on the infrastructure, I think, there's something like 22 schemes coming up. And I just, obviously I'm thinking of my own area, but on Forest Road, but, how do we make sure that gets done at some point, I suppose the question is.
Well, I guess in terms of behavioural shift, getting people onto bikes and walking more, no, we don't have a target. Government doesn't have a target, and I think that's because it's very difficult to measure cycling and walking trips, because they're so varied. Cars are easy to capture, car trips, because vehicles are sort of channeled into roads and you can get that data. But trying to get it for for walking and cycling is more difficult. So government hasn't set any numbers, just an aspiration. Like I said earlier, that these vast majority of short trips would be made on foot or by bike. In terms of targets for infrastructure delivery and expenditure, I think we could say there's been a shift, certainly, in terms of our focus on how the capital programme, the Housing Transport Capital Programme, is spent in the last few years, certainly since the pandemic, because the mood has changed and people are embracing active travel much more than they did before. Government are promoting it much more than they did before. Money is available much more than it was before. And we've also just left a period where we've implemented a lot of large infrastructure projects on our network, which has put us in good stead for some time. So now our programme is shifting much more towards providing for sustainable travel. So we've seen a lot more, or we certainly will in this coming programme that is in its draft stage at the moment, a lot more walking and cycling infrastructure coming in, a lot more money being allocated to that, and more money being allocated to maintenance. Because, of course, it's not just about building new, it's also about making sure that what we have at the moment is kept to a good standard, remains attractive and usable. So I don't think we've targeted how much we're going to spend, but I think it's going to be clear to see that our priority focus in our infrastructure delivery is going to be featuring walking and cycling benefits a lot.
Okay, and just before Ian jumps in, it occurs to me sometimes that completely lost the question. Ian, take over while I think of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, Neil, for quite a comprehensive presentation. I was quite taken by the My Journey concept that you mentioned, and the thought occurs to me that with a bit of free thinking, that concept could easily be turned into some sort of app that one could have on your smartphone or something like that. And that led me to think about the comments you were making about planning for this type of activity. And while I realise it's difficult, bearing in mind the financial constraints that we're all going to have in the future, and that we want to put the money that we've got to the best advantage, do we have any data, and indeed is it possible to get any data on the numbers of people who are actually cycling, the typical sort of distances that they cycle, and the principal locations where they are either going to or coming from? Because I realise that, you know, we've probably got a number of people who are using the highways and the byways for training for the Tour of France type of thing, but those are really, I suspect, a minority. We want to concentrate on the majority. And I'm wondering if there is any work that we have done, or indeed whether it's possible to do work to collect that data to enable us to make informed decisions as to where to put the resource in the future.
Well, I think this probably falls under the projects that are looking at, and these are national projects, government projects, looking at how we're going to be collecting travel data in future. For example, traffic data used to be collected solely by loops across the carriageway, and that picked up the metal going, they were magnetic and picked up the metal of the vehicle going above, and that's how you counted each vehicle. Whereas now you can have anonymized Bluetooth data from the Bluetooth devices that are most commonly switched on in vehicles now, phones, etc., and track those journeys, seeing where the vehicles are going to and from, how fast they're travelling, and so on. It's all anonymised, so there's no data issues there. And I think cycling will follow, because most people walking and cycling will have a phone in their pocket, and that will provide the means by which to track anonymised journeys. I think the difficulty otherwise is with so many iterations of journeys by foot or by bike, because of the turnings you can take, the alleyways you can walk down, you couldn't collect that data with sort of hardwired technology without it being outrageously expensive and having thousands and thousands of points at which to collect it. So I think the only way you're going to get that data is by using something that's already there, and I think that's based around the fact that we're all walking with phones in our pockets.
Thank you.
Can I just take Ian's point of encouraging people, because I know that one of the big problems here is the weather, of course, and the winter we've just had is a bit tough for people, although I do see people for cycling, so it's amazing. But, one of the things which I think might help is clubs, actually. There are lots of clubs, that go cycling, and it's very community-based, and you make friends, and, it's just fun. And I just wondered if we can promote that a bit, actually, because it gets people out and talking.
Well, the Love to Ride incentivisation scheme I only touched on briefly earlier, didn't I? But that is a form of that, in that you can group together with other people that are doing similar journeys and create your own club, if only to provide the motivation for you all to keep at it, even if you're not necessarily doing the same journeys and riding together. So, yeah, you're right, because we know that walking and cycling trips increase during the summer, and we know they decline during the winter. And we know that school trips in particular revert back to the car when it rains. It is the challenge. So it's about trying to capture imagination, and that's not just about perhaps the one reason that people have made the shift, because of course there could be a number, couldn't there? You might be walking and cycling because it's cheaper in the current climate. You might be walking and cycling because you want to get fitter, to improve your health, or it might be that you want to make a contribution to improving the environment. So it's about finding or putting enough hooks out there and trying to get people's imagination to attach to one of those to keep that motivation going.
I know that one of the problems, I think you put it in the report actually, is people have a bit of a fear of traffic and lorries getting close to them. And I know that you've touched on this, Neil, but when it comes to the country areas, we've got to do more work there and try and work out how, and sharing platforms, i.e. sharing roads with bikes, and I know you've got it in your head, so that's, that will help, I think.
Yeah, I think in the rural areas we've got the greatest challenge, because we don't have much highway. We have often no footway, perhaps. We have a narrow lane. So we have to think more broadly about how we're going to tackle those areas, and that's where partnership with town and parish councils is going to help, because in many cases parish councils have land that abut the highway, and we also have recreational areas, open spaces. So we need to think more broadly about how we make use of what's available collectively to get the connections, rather than perhaps look at it traditionally about walking or cycling adjacent to the road.
I'll just go to Chris next, and then Mary. So Chris Dorrell.
Thanks, Tony. And thanks, Neil, for a very full presentation, very informative, I think, and also just setting out the council's aspirations and about walking and cycling, and noting the fact that walking in particular has increased in recent years. I think the biggest thing we have in our favour is that actually, when you do walk around quite a lot of places in our borough, it's a very pleasant experience, and I think that that's worth doing. It is challenging, I think, getting people to make people who are very car-based to make the jump, and sometimes it is a jump because the routes are so very different. But I think with what we've got in this strategy, and what actually more than one parish council has iterated in its adopted neighbourhood plan, the desire to improve links, I think that's a significant area to look at. And I just would say, I mean, plans are, we have schemes in place. I mean, in terms of what opportunities come up, how ready are we to take up, to make the most of opportunities in those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we have our radar switched on. I mean, certainly, what we're developing, what as part of our capital program, and what we're seeing delivered through that is probably well, nowhere near the largest proportion of what we're thinking about could be achieved. The difficulty is actually getting something workable, being in possession of all of the various aspects that give you the control, and more often than not, that's having control over land and having space. It's also about finding the justification for perhaps prioritising that mode of transport over another, because of course it is a question of balance. Some would argue that providing facilities first will create use. Others would argue that there needs to be evidence of use or potential use first before you provide. Otherwise, potentially you're just building infrastructure that won't be used. So it is difficult. I mean, I would say that almost the aspiration is the easier part. It's actually getting the buy-in from the public and the residents to see the value of some of those assets if it means that some other modes of transport need to make a sacrifice to have them. Does that make sense? This is all part of the gradual shift in people's thinking, and the fact that people are more alive now to active travel for a number of reasons, and perhaps that task is becoming easier, and that change and those choices will be more easily accepted.
Yes, I certainly think, I mean, the council joining the national app, My Journey, and it's quite interesting when you put a few journeys in there. It's quite telling how very often, particularly with our network of footpaths and things, actually the walked or cycled route actually comes out pretty close in some cases in terms of time to the driven route, and I think that that's quite a significant thing. And I think if people just get to the hang of particularly journeys they don't make that often, where they might actually be more inclined to look at what route they're using, I think that maybe helps with a bit of the modal shift. Do you think that's something that would take things forward?
Yeah, we're doing quite a lot of promotion on that platform. Taking Councillor Leake's point, I think that we need to get that onto an app. Currently, it's on our website, but we have aspirations to get that onto a phone app so that it's just that bit easier. If people are in leisure time, often looking at their phone these days, aren't they? And that would be a really good and easy way for them to test whether a journey that they're planning to make could be done just as easily or easier on foot or by bike. Yeah, I mean, and I think as the point was made earlier, it's not about sort of preaching to the converted. It's about picking up new recruits for walking and cycling, and how we get that thought in their mind, because there will be many out there that would dismiss it out of hand and wouldn't know that it's as easy as it is. It's getting that information in front of them to show them that, had you ever considered? And that's that whole promotional exercise, which is almost as important as providing the infrastructure, because otherwise we'll spend a lot of money on a lot of construction and it's just not going to be used.
Be quite nice to see a lot of councillors actually coming to the council offices on bikes. Actually, that would do it. Mary.
Hypocrite I am, because my knees would never pedal on a bike now, I tell you that now. But I would really love the idea. And when you talk to people, they say, okay, so what do I do with my bike then? So they go on a journey, they come to the shopping centres, they go from one place to another, but then they have to leave their bike. They have to leave their bike at the station, and bikes for a good cyclist or for someone taking up now is a big investment. So they do these wonderful trips all through Swimley Forest. They're great cyclists, but they don't go to the shopping centre because they're scared. They won't leave their expensive bike in the middle of a shopping centre. And so what can we do to improve the safety so that people do go to the station in the morning and leave their bike there? I mean, Amsterdam, wonderful, love it, but it's just going underground now with all their bikes and underground things to make them safe. Because when you can't go anywhere in Amsterdam without tripping over all the bikes that are part. So if you go to the station, where do you actually leave your bike all day long knowing it's going to be perfectly safe for when you come home and cycle home? Because then they would come from Warfield and Sandhurst and all the rest of it to a station, or they would cycle from the station to their firm. And if the job and all our businesses had good cycle places where they were safe to store, I think we'd be on a real winner. We do have, but they're just those hoops. And those hoops, to carry a huge bar, a bolt with you, that would enable the bicycle never to have its wheels taken off, or to have time to take all the wheels off and take them with you, or whatever, to make an expensive bike secure, is difficult.
Yeah, just to help Mary, or add to Mary's, the hangars, aren't they? Some of the infrastructure where you can go in and you could lock it up, and then you have a key, you have a code to get into the system, and there your bike is. I've seen them some stations, and when I tried to go to, I think it was Great Western Railways to see, because I can't remember which station, Ascot's got one, I think, but I'm not sure about Sandhurst. Certainly Martin Herons, I don't think, has one. But they seem to say, oh, well, it's up to the council to give us land, which I thought was a great answer. Anyway.
It can be a question of space. We've got about 350 cycle hoops in the town centre. I mean, there is, taking Councillor Templeton's point about the fact they are hoops, they're not covered racks, but I mean, they are secure in that they are securely attached to the ground. They're underused given the number that are there, I would say. I don't know whether that's just about security or whether that's just about the conversation we're having tonight in terms of the number of trips that are being made by bike. Town centre has CCTV across it. I don't have the statistics of cycle crime in the town, but it may well be that there's some dispelling of concerns, perhaps, if people are not cycling to the town for that reason. By giving those crime statistics, that's maybe something we should think about, actually encouraging people to leave their bikes where they will be safe. But there are lots of different types of cycle parking. Yeah, at the station, I think that there are racks which are semi-vertical to save space. We've worked with rail companies in the past to make sure that we're maximising. I mean, we can't force their hand, but we've encouraged them, and they have provided cycle parking. I don't think any one location in the borough is over capacity. So I don't think it's the fact that we haven't got enough cycle parking, putting aside the type that it is and whether people prefer it or not. It's about people using it. So maybe that's something for me to take away about talking to colleagues and getting some statistics to see whether actually we can be telling a positive story about the fact that bikes can be left safely within Bracknell, which historically has always had a good record in terms of crime. Perhaps that isn't a real issue, perhaps more a perception. But if it isn't, then maybe that's equally something we need to address.
I've no idea whether it's perception or not, but it's good to find out, because that would be a really good story to say that cycling is safe because you can leave it.
Indeed.
One of the problems that has been brought out, Neil, and I don't know how you tackle this, is when, even in the town, for instance, where you are negotiating roundabouts, and it all becomes a bit difficult. You have to dismount, then you have to wait for the traffic, and obviously this is existing infrastructure. What's your feeling about all that?
Well, roundabouts are the most difficult for an engineer to mix cyclists, pedestrians and vehicles together, which is why we try and get those crossing points and navigation points separate before or after, so that those three road users don't have to meet at the point of greatest conflict. So, I mean, I've seen some examples, other countries, even in the UK, where engineers have attempted to come up with arrangements of mixing the cycle lanes in with general traffic, with all sorts of unusual giveaway points around the junction. But in some of them, somewhat eye-watering for me, anyway. So I think what we've done so far and would continue to do is try not to put that mix together, but find a solution that separates those modes out, gets the same connection, but without everyone meeting at the difficult spot.
I mean, this happens in Holland, doesn't it? Mary mentioned this. And, you know, somehow it looks chaotic, but it all works pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, that's in part, though, I think, due to the unfortunate to say, but I think that's due to the mindset of road users in Europe, which is seemingly different, I'm afraid, to the UK. And I think those sorts of pieces of infrastructure and the certainly for some countries, the levels of walking and cycling that they have being that much greater, those two things combined enable you to achieve more with less conflict. I think in the UK it's still, we're some way behind in terms of that mindset, I think.
I guess we'll get more, and maybe we'll catch up. Chris, have you got a view on this?
I was just going to add something very briefly about the Netherlands. A few years ago, I went to stay with some friends there, and it was quite interesting what came out. Now, there's a couple of enormous advantages. One is that the land is very flat. I think the highest place in the Netherlands is Hilversum, which is 20 meters above sea level. There's also the rather the more serious thing that towns like Rotterdam were hugely bombed during World War II, so they had the space to put in completely new roads and things. It is not getting people on cycleways, and their cycleways, some of their cycleways are the size of our roads. It has not just happened. There was significant political intervention to make it happen. There are very heavy penalties on insurance should a motorist have an accident with a cyclist, particularly if that cyclist is a child. So there has had over the years to be quite a lot of push to get where they are, but they certainly do. I mean, the take up is enormous. I remember getting off the train at Delft and being pointed to showing the new bike storage facility, which would hold 10,000 bikes. They rather took the shine off it by saying that in 20 years staying there, they'd lost count of the number of bikes they'd had nicked. So, you know, it's just a few things that, you know, I think there's a lot of good there, and I did see a most fantastic construction of a roundabout that would separate out cyclists, pedestrians, and motorists. I think it was near Haarlem, and quite very interesting. But these things don't you know, there are different reasons why they happen. But I think, you know, things can be. It's amazing what you can you know, do with a bit of you know, with a bit of sort of persuasion and yes, if the mindset is willing to take them on.
You're Neil, an avid cyclist, I know, and you cycle on the continent a lot. They've got traffic lights as well, I think, in Holland, actually, for cyclists, because I seem to remember doing that. So maybe this will all come if we encourage things. Can I just ask a couple of other questions, just very quickly? A lot of people have said, and I know you're looking at this in the town centre, where cyclists are cycling through crowds which really are not acceptable. And I know in Holland, if you do that, because I nearly did, you get an instant fine for doing that. We don't seem to be able to control that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the Bracknell Town Centre is a pedestrian zone, and it's illegal to cycle through, and all the entry points into that pedestrian area make it quite clear that you can't cycle. It has the words "no cycling" underneath the sign that prohibits cycling. So it is an enforcement issue. I think many people know that cycle through the town that you shouldn't be doing it. But I think the challenge is for the police to be there to see them doing it at the time. And I think the perpetrators know that. So people are taking a chance and getting away with it. And so they continue to do it. We've done some work with the Lexicon with their marshals and their staff to try and add to that. I mean, obviously they won't have enforcement powers, but it's about trying to educate and stopping and just giving that impression that people are being noticed, which has had some effect, but there will always be an element of those that will need to be prosecuted, because that's the only way that they will change their behaviours. Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing all we can, but I think this is as much a challenge for the police as with any other sort of road traffic offence at the moment, with the resources that they have and the wide range of crimes they're
I
trying to
presume
cover.
also, Neil, it's on camera, isn't it? So it can be seen on camera.
Yes, but problem is no number plates on bicycles.
No.
Of course, that was a debate a little while back, wasn't it? But these individuals difficult to identify unless they're already on a database for something they shouldn't have done.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not much use as an enforcement tool, unfortunately.
Mary.
Yeah, I understood that the police had given the policemen that are or the police powers that are employed by the shops the enforcement powers of a real policeman, a normal policeman. I understood from Helen, one of them. So if they can do it with some, it would be really good if they could give fines as well for cycling.
I think are we possibly talking about PCSOs as opposed to police officers? And I think yes, they do have enforcement powers, and I should imagine they probably do go as far as fixed penalties. But I think it's as difficult to get PCSOs in the town as regularly to catch all
to this
perpetrators.
too, Neil. David.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Councillor Templeton's talking about the CSAS scheme, which is something that is managed through the Public Protection Partnership. And yes, there are certain powers which we can allocate and have done to the Lexicon security staff, but cycling is not one of the powers that we can enforce on as a local authority, and we can't give that power to the Lexicon staff either. I believe it's a police enforcement only on that particular aspect.
I saw some police on horses going through the town the other day. I was quite astonished, actually. Sure they could do it. Yeah, that's what I thought. Just one last question. I read, I think it was in the infrastructure, that you were, in designing these cycle lanes, Neil, there was lighting considered. And I suppose I would say that in rural areas, we just don't want lighting, so they can't all be M5s or M3s. We've got to cut our cloth accordingly, haven't we? They don't all have to be high spec, is what I mean.
Yes, we do. We've got biodiversity issues, bat surveys, all sorts of issues that we need to consider these days that perhaps we once didn't. So yes, we need to be sympathetic. And I think that's probably the point that we will get to is recognising, certainly when we develop the LC-WIP further, that some of those connections into the rural parts won't be of an urban standard. They can't be, people won't want them to be. But the downside of that is they don't necessarily then provide all of the journeys that you would want for walking and cycling. I mean, there are compromises, solar powered units, low level lighting, there are compromises there which can probably be achieved to make routes safe. But no, you're right. They couldn't be the standard that you would see in an urban area. But then perhaps they don't need to be if the usage levels are lower and the likelihood of conflict on them is lower. It's about looking at all the tools in the box.
I'm pushing the wrong one. Thank you very much, Neil. I think that completes all the questions. Thank you so much for all that. We've had a good bash on that. And again, thank you for the team and yourself for spearheading that strategy, because it's a really good one. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And Hannah, when's the next meeting? I meant to ask you before and I didn't. It's in March, so 9th of March. Okay, so 9th of March will be the next one. I know we're talking also about some topics in the meantime with some people about something we can carry in the climate change panel. Mary.
Could I just bring one thing up, which a person came into Mother and Toddler and asked me to collect during my litter pick, and that is these VAPs that are throwaway VAPs, because the VAPs contain recyclable batteries, lithium and the rest of them, which should be collected somewhere, because her husband is going to take them all apart for me and collect the recycled batteries. So I did collect 17 when we were out on the litter pick, and she's got them in the bag. So anyway.
Yes, electronic vapes are a considerable problem and getting bigger and bigger by the day. Unfortunately, the disposable ones particularly are made of all various different types of materials. Some have recyclable parts, some don't. At the moment what we're doing is we can collect them through the HMRCs, which is the recycling centres at Longshot Lane and Smallmead. So they can be taken there and they will be sorted into the ones that can be recycled and the ones that can't. So that's the best advice we've got at the moment. We are also working with RE3 looking at a promotion campaign to encourage more recycling of them rather than just disposal of them. So yeah, it's a live issue that we're very well aware of, and it's not going to be an easy one to solve, unfortunately.
Some of the content of these are illegal substances that be very careful when collecting, and I would say that honestly to most people. Okay, if you're doing your litter picks like I do, the bombs we get as well, the silver bombs. It's the young persons today at the moment. We do have a substantial problem with them. Okay, it's not just collecting about it's what is in some of them.
Okay, thank you. We know that's a problem. Thanks to everyone. Thanks for the contributions. As Hannah said, it's the 9th of March is the next one. We'll let you know what the topics are. Thank you very much, and I would bid you good night. Good night.
Good night, all.
Night, Tony.